the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A state of control.
This is A State of Control, episode 19, recorded Thursday, April 9th, 2015. Modern approaches to control systems design. This is A State of Control, the monthly look at control and automation in the AV space. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us this month is Steve Greenblatt, Chief Everything at Control Concepts. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing great. How about you? How's things?
Doing well. Also with us is Rich Fregosa from FregosaDesign.com. How are you, sir?
Mellow state of emergency. We have no water. Greetings from the West Coast. But other than that, we're great. Ooh, that was inauspicious.
You have some water, correct?
Some, yes.
All right. Also with us is Brad Grimes, no stranger to these parts. He is the editor-in-chief, is that right?
Sort of. Director of Editorial Operations.
Director of Editorial, there we go, at InfoComm International. And last but not least, Tim is new, I love his name, so be nice to him, guys. His name is Tim Cape, CTSD and the Principal Consultant at Technitech. How are you, sir?
Doing well, thank you. We're full of pollen down here in Atlanta right now.
Oh, goody. You can keep it, brother.
Yeah.
All right, so here's an interesting one. This one is, I'm not going to say it's special, because all the shows are special. But Tim, Steve, and myself, we were involved in a white paper at InfoComm, and actually it was very pleasantly surprised when I was invited to this. I had never been involved in writing a white paper for InfoComm. The title of the white paper is Modern Approaches to Control System Design. And it's first of all, it was an interesting experience, right? You've got a number of folks. You've got folks from Crestron, AMX, Extron. You have consultants like Tim. You've got control folks like Steve and myself and Howard Nunez from Pepperdash. So it was an interesting cross section. David Barnett, our buddy who's been on the show a couple times, he's also a consultant. He was on this task force as well. So it was probably about a 4 or 5 month process with all of us kind of writing different things and taking our own our own little sections and putting our input, and then all of us as a group obviously took a look at the entire document and made our comments on what everybody else had written. So what we kind of want to do on this episode is take a look at the process, take a look at the document, and we're going to get Rich's comments from someone who wasn't on the task force and someone who obviously knows a lot about control, and also Brad from InfoComm standpoint as to why. So Brad, actually, we'll start off with you. As InfoComm and as the organization, over 10 years ago now, InfoComm created probably one of the preeminent documents called Dashboard for Control, and it's something that I used when I was in education, writing RFPs. It's something that I use now as I manage programmers, and it's a way for us to keep consistency. This document, though, is not a redo of that. It's kind of a build on that. So from InfoComm's standpoint, why take a look at this now? Again, almost 10 years later after Dashboard.
Well, as you alluded to, the dashboard, which was a fantastic document, came out before there was such thing as an iPad or before anybody wanted to control a room system from their phone or anything like that. It's an important part of what InfoComm does education-wise. People teach using the dashboard. Like you said, people learn from the dashboard. It was an important document, and it was a big document. Tim Cape knows all about that. It was, he was deeply involved in the dashboard design. And so what happened, I guess the end of last year, was, folks in our education department who are always designing curriculum around, a lot of our assets. We're looking at the dashboard and saying, we don't want to completely overhaul it right now. A lot of what's in the dashboard is still very applicable today, but we want to ask folks in the industry to give us a little bit of a take on how you might inject some of the modern issues into control systems design, and that was the impetus for this paper. We grabbed a lot of the folks who worked on the original dashboard. We grabbed some folks who had fresh perspectives. There were, like you said, a lot of people involved from all sectors of the AV industry, and this is by no means supposed to be the end-all, be-all in control systems design, but it is supposed to raise some issues that obviously folks like yourself have to keep in mind when they're integrating control systems today.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, I want to take yours from the consultant standpoint, because some of the interesting conversations, and I learned an awful lot as much as I gave in this process, is learning from folks like yourself and Howard Nunez and like I said, David Barnett. From your standpoint, what value do you think a document like this brings, not only the industry, but some of the folks that we talked about during this process, the true end users?
Well, I think it has a lot of benefits, as Brad alluded to, and one of them is, from my perspective, is it can bring a lot of structure to how the industry can think about control systems and control system design and the process of both delivering the control system as part of the overall AV process, as well as just how to allocate resources and expertise to address the specific parts of the process that a lot of times got overlooked in terms of separating out the expertise that was required. One of the big things, and it's always been a problem in the industry, it's getting a lot better now, is that the AV integrators would just throw a set of drawings at a programmer and say, here, design a control system. And if they were a good programmer, you might get great code, but they might be a bad user interface designer. Yeah. The opposite can also be true. It's just, it's hard to find somebody who's got all the necessary skills in one place. So part of the benefit is to help people think about the different aspects of control system design in a modern setting, and we've also highlighted in the paper some of the other things that were not addressed in the dashboard and some of the things that are new to the control system design process that weren't there a few years ago, as Brad talked about.
Yeah. Rich, from someone who I continue to learn from, but you weren't part of this process, so I want to get your input from this. What I guess the best way to ask is from someone who, the folks who wrote it would ask someone who's downloading it and reading it for the first time. We would ask that you kind of take a look at it and put some of these practices into place. What kind of impact is that going to have on the customers, on your clients on a day-to-day basis?
I think it really comes down to kind of a project basis. Information's always good, and consistent information is even better. One of the things that constantly we still have, 25 years later, is what is it you do? What does this system do? Literally, you will still get that question. You'll get a new technology manager comes in, a new facilities person who comes in. These are people who don't have experience with our industry. They're being put in a position from a commercial standpoint. They're now running this building, and so they're drinking from the fire hose. And sometimes the first question is, okay, well, what is some of the stuff that I'm now responsible for? What do they do? I think that more than anything else, it allows at least a consistent language that we can all try working within a framework. Everything starts somewhere. The IEEE started out with everybody kind of getting together saying, hey, we need to find a way to at least be consistent with one another, and then from there became a standard. Not to say that this is a standard, but at least it's a step in the right direction. It's walking away from it being the Wild West, and everybody did it their own way, and everybody had their secret sauce, and they had to kind of pitch why we are the ones who are the only ones who can do this, and the market change. And I think that a document like this helps the market in terms of reinforcing that collaboration is more important, and being unified as an industry is more important, because if we can all at least somewhat align behind a process, it makes it easier in the bid process and in apples oranges comparison. It streamlines the process for everybody, and even for smaller companies who don't have a project manager. They don't have somebody who's a production manager, some of the smaller houses. It gives them the ability to up their game as much as it does for a large house, a large software house or a design build house, to be able to say, this is how we can maintain our brand consistency throughout, and also support industry standards. Because again, we're only going to be as strong as the alignments we create with one another. And like I said before, the days of the Old West and just everybody doing their own thing, it's not productive, because the rest of the tech industry has completely surpassed that. And so if we don't, we find ourselves potentially being the odd man out. So I think it's necessary. I think that it's a smart move. It was time to do it, because the dashboard was a great document and a great approach. But a lot's changed in 10 years. I mean, they're like Brad was saying, is that there was stuff that didn't even exist when the dashboard came about, and we have to stay current as well. We are in the tech industry, so it's kind of important.
Yes, a little bit. Steve, I'm going to delve into something that because Rich brought it up, so I can blame him, and that's the S word. That's the standard word. A lot has been written over. Good Lord, the last 10 years at least. Not only the word convergence, right, but comparing the AV industry to the IAT industry. And Rich brought up the IEEE. There are a number of standards. There are a number of best practices in the IT world. Is this document maybe a good conversation starter for creating a standard in control?
I don't know if a standard is probably going to end up being something that would be a good fit, but because of what we do has so much creativity. However, a guideline, I think, might be a better term for it. I think similar to what Rich is saying, we needed to really document the foundation of what we do, to be able to give everybody a cursory understanding of what goes into control systems and what goes into programming and user interface design, and the dashboard, I think, played a great role for us to have something to point to when we're speaking with a client and saying that what we're offering you, we didn't just make up today, and this is not something that we just do. This is what our industry has adopted, and this is the guideline that has been offered from our industry association. It's not the only way to do it, but it gave them a lot of confidence in knowing that what we're doing, it follows some type of industry best practice. That was only one part of it, and now with this exercise we got into a lot of the other components of what we do. So I think that what we're documenting here, and being that we all collaborated on it, we could all agree that there are a lot of commonalities in the way we do what we do, and I think that so I don't know that a standard, I think, is something that's more of a pass-fail, but a guideline is something that can be followed and interpreted. So that would be what I think would probably be a good fit for what would help to provide structure for control system design and programming and so forth.
Do you think, Steve, we'll keep with you on this. Do you think we're scared of the word standard in the industry, especially when it comes to control folks? Because, yes, there's a lot of creativity, but the argument could be made, that folks who program in Python and Ruby on Rails are just as creative and have, unique little ways to do it, but there are still benchmarks and standards in those areas.
Possibly, I think it's still very new to us in our industry, and it's something that we've only, and I was involved in the energy management standard. It's still something that we've only been able to come up with a handful of them, and they take a lot of time to do, and I think that they require a lot of compliance. So I do think that it's something that presents a challenge for our industry.
Well, you're going to have an economy of scale. Sorry, I just want to jump. I mean, this is, if you think about it, this is the equivalent of you guys creating an app guide, and I feel that it's, you know, kind of the backdoor approach of saying, look, we're now pushing you into the software world, which God knows that, you know, I've never said that we need to be software developers instead of hardware developers, but this is, if you pull up, you know, again, and we're not dealing with the scale of like 100 million devices coming out this quarter, but if you pull up, you know, in a developers forum in Apple or Android, you can pull down documents which say, if you're going to make an app, here are the things that we normally do. And then as a developer, what you were talking about, Steve, which was the creative side, which is what they bring to it, they can either choose to work with it or they can go off the rails and do it their own way. But at that point, it's a conscious effort to be completely different than what pretty much everybody else is doing. And so this document, I feel, is that first one, which is saying, you know, truly, you are becoming, whether you want to or not, app developers, and you need to start looking at that way of doing things because the rest of the tech community is moving in that direction.
Yeah, and I want to jump in on the standards thing too, because I think we have to think about that carefully, because I think on the performance side, which is where InfoComm has been focused in terms of ANSI standards, it's a different look at what standards are, and it's a lot harder, I think, to come up with performance level standards that are related to control. There's a few things that might be applicable, like button sizes and fonts and spacing and number of clicks to do functions, things like that we might be able to come up with, but it's kind of like, I think of it in terms of like interior design, where in the architectural world, where there's no standard for good design. They're creative and they make good designs, but there are standards for how high a counter should be and what types of furniture should be, you know, what size furniture should be and how wide corridors need to be and things like that. Same thing with the ADA. So there's certain parts of the fundamentals that can be put out there, but I think for what is normally done in control system design, what we have is a really good guideline and a best practice. And like I say, it gives a structure to how people think about control systems and control system design. And one of the things that I hope this document will do is to help people in the industry, no matter what role they play, if they're a consultant or an integrator or control system programmer or an end user, to ask the right questions. How is the system getting done? And who's going to find out what our needs are to be able to create the control system and the AV system? And questions like that. So I'm not sure a standard is going to be appropriate, but definitely as a best practice, I think that's the way we should go.
All right. I one more question on the standard, and I'll get off of it. Brad, this is to you. Tim mentioned the fact that, you know, as an organization and where InfoComm has been headed is more performance-based, right? Mm-hmm. Is this something where InfoComm should take a look and say, you know what, guys, there's some best practices here, whether it's taking off of this document or something else, and saying let's create a standard here?
Well, we currently are not. I mean, there's not a control systems standard in the works. Just to clarify, a performance standard, you know, we pursue performance standards as opposed to, say, technology standards like the IEEE does. You know, the performance standards is how a system should operate. It's basically how the client gets what the client wants in the end, and that's what it's about. Control systems could go down that path, I would imagine. What I like about the document and what the group put together is that it really is sort of best practice process focused. I like that while it's written for people who do control systems design, you can hand it to an end user, and an end user gets something out of it because they understand the questions that need to be asked, they understand the decisions that go into a system. There are still lots of ways to do control systems, as we all know. I mean, there will always be the client who wants a very elaborate, very custom control system. And there will be the client who, you know, wants something configuration-based, something that's, you know, doesn't require all of that. But the important thing is how you understand how they arrive at that need and that requirement, and how we in the industry deliver it to them. And a document like this, I like, because you can print it out and you could give it to your client, and it would be of as much value to them as it would be to a control systems designer or a programmer or somebody else. That's talking around the subject. Could control systems design or aspects of it go down a standards path? I suppose they could. I mean, there are probably a lot of things that we could standardize and make sure that everybody does, so that they arrive at the right end result. We're not currently pursuing it that way, but as Tim alluded to, standards take a lot of time, and there's clearly a lot of ideas that we could build around this.
Yeah, absolutely. They do take quite a lot of time. Like I said, this is the first white paper I've ever been involved in, but I have a number of colleagues who have been involved in those standard processes, and there are 8, 9, 10 months, sometimes a year to for the entire process. So. And
I'd be remiss, I'm sorry to interrupt, if I didn't thank you and Tim and Steve and everybody else who worked on this. Like you said, the standards sometimes take years. I mean, this is all volunteer driven. These are folks who give their time and their expertise to InfoComm and to each other and to the industry. And if I didn't do it, and I know I didn't do it at the top of the show, I do want to thank everybody who was involved in this.
I was told we were getting T-shirts. That's
Is that why you did it?
Maybe a drink at the show.
The show.
You get 3 free tickets to the Extron booth.
Nice. One thing that I'll chime in on is that aside from a standard, it'd be great to be able to have some type of learning modules based on this type of material, so that we can have some consistency in the way people. The way control systems are handled, managed, programmed, whatever it might be, and I think that is probably one of the drivers for something like this. And I can imagine. I know that there was talk at some point about the idea of a CTSP, a programming CTS designation, but again that the ability to test to something like that is such a challenge because of the diversity of what we have to know, and how it really isn't necessarily concrete or from one specific area.
So are you suggesting something like one of the levels of one of the online courses? Or are you thinking of something more intimate and intricate, like the boot camp for CTSD or CTSI?
Yeah, I would say anything that we could do that isn't manufacturer related would be very valuable, because I think for anybody new getting into the industry, which is something that I think we're all challenged with and we're all looking to pursue, the ability to get them trained and have them trained in a way that has a common approach and is not really steered in one direction or influenced by one type of platform, I think would be very valuable, being that there really isn't necessarily schooling for what we do.
And I think let me jump in here. Just to elaborate on that, what you said, Steve, I think that there's a lot of things in the document that allow for, as Brad said, it's sort of a cursory look in many ways, even though it's comprehensive in terms of the overview, and the control systems layer model that we have in there gives people a way to think about how to approach the control systems and address different parts of it. But there's many points in this document, if you look at all the different topics and even all the little components of the control system layer model, that one could deep dive into and create a whole course or series of courses just on some of those individual topics. There's a lot of places to go from all the way from user interaction, navigation design, user interface design, certainly programming, platform selection, all the different aspects of interacting with the enterprise, as well as the upfront part of how do you go about establishing what the needs are from the users and applying that to a system design. The whole point of this thing is not to tell you what the end point should look like, what the end of the process should look like, but how to get to that best endpoint in the process for what the users need.
Good.
And this is exactly what will happen, exactly what Tim and Steve was talking about. I mean, this InfoComm's been spending a lot of resources and time over the last year or so taking all its knowledge from all its courses and all its white papers and all its standards and all its guides and putting them in this content management system, which we call a knowledge bank right now. This white paper is already in there, and it's modularized, if you will. It's componentized, just like dashboards is in there. So that's exactly the point of this. So if we decide that CTSD prep requires some of this knowledge, you build it right there. You build it on the fly. It gets added right into existing coursework. If there was going to be a control systems design course of one way or another at a remote location or at the show or somewhere else, it can be built out of this knowledge bank, and it can take some of the best from dashboard and some of the best from the current white paper and build it together. So that's exactly what Steve and Tim were saying is what's going to happen with this kind of knowledge, and we're going to do it with all the knowledge that we build, whether it's in classes or in white papers or anywhere else. It becomes part of this knowledge bank so that we can always further the training that InfoComm does for its members.
Well, and here's the other thing is I've actually let some of my clients know that this is coming down the pipeline because they are actively recruiting salespeople who aren't necessarily from the industry and getting those people up to speed on what exactly a control system is, what it can do, and the process of actually not engineering it but pricing it correctly. You don't go in and say I can launch the space shuttle and it's only going to cost you $10. So that's also important information as we educate the next generation of AV professionals coming up behind us. All right, let's take a look at it. We mentioned the dashboard for control an awful lot, both in our conversations and in this episode today. Some of the things that have happened since early 2000s, which is when the original dashboard was released, have changed. We've mentioned that, the advent of mobile, and the fact that you've got the capability of nearly every control system, and I say nearly because I don't want to say all. There's probably one or two that's not quite available on the mobile platform yet. Tim Cabe, from that standpoint, what are some of the areas, whether it's design or it's color scheme, we talk about that, and what colors work well with others, but what are some things that have not changed in the last 10 years or so that we really, as a group, as a task force, didn't want to change from the dashboard?
Well, I think just to back up for a second, I think it's important to note for listeners who may not be familiar with these documents what the differences are, because the dashboard for controls started out as more of a oriented towards the graphical design, as how do you make control systems be like the dashboard of a car, common from screen to screen, so that users can go between systems and navigate them effectively, just like they do different cars, and they don't have to look the same, but navigationally they can be kind of the same. And a lot of that document had to do with that graphical aspect, and there was a lot of reference information in some of the accompanying documents that talked about color and fonts and how we perceive things, and that was really important information. That kind of thing really hasn't changed. Trying to create a guideline for navigational consistency and some of the fundamentals of how we perceive color and how we read a screen and how we navigate control systems really hasn't changed over that time, because that's based on perception and use and that kind of thing. So what's in the new document is really, as we've talked about, more about the process. We don't have the information that's in dashboard in the new document. It's really more about the overview of everything that's in there. So I think those fundamentals that haven't changed are still applicable today of what we talked about 10 years ago. There's a few new things that we didn't reference then directly, and what the options are for creating a graphical user interface in terms of some of the interface elements that are beyond just the button. And so that's changed a little bit, but the fundamentals are pretty much the same. Obviously, the things that have changed have to do primarily, I think, with mobility and with enterprise that we've had to deal with, and that's what we've tried to bring in, among other things, with the new document.
All right. Steve, from your standpoint, what are some of the things that we probably haven't touched in the last 10 years?
That we haven't touched in terms of I think that the room applications and the what we've actually done, what we do this for has remained the same from a local perspective. We're still programming for boardrooms and conference rooms and classrooms and residences and so forth. Some of the equipment and the technology that we work with is a little different, but the applications that we're working with are the same, and the user interfaces are fairly the same. You know, we have different sizes and maybe there's with the advent of mobile, there's different types of interactions, but the human interface design and approach is pretty much consistent, and that's something that probably won't change, and the color theory won't change, and knowing how to design a user interface. For the most part, when we all looked at the dashboard document, we said, really, aside from updating and taking out the references to VCRs and document cameras and slide projectors, everything is pretty much status quo. So, and that was very comforting, I think. What was really interesting about looking forward with this new document is all the ideas that we're able to pool together as to what does the future look like and what is it that we currently do, and everybody kind of had a little bit of a different spin on it because the AV control systems have become so diverse, I think, in what they're capable of.
All right, Rich, from your standpoint and from someone who wasn't involved in this process, and you're an outsider looking in, what do you think there are some areas that we didn't hit on that we should have, or are still developing, and maybe it's one of those things where we need to keep an eye on them and maybe address it again in a year or two?
I think, and again, it's something that I actively campaign about. I think we need to be careful about being too insular and focusing just on who we are in our industry as a control industry. In terms of the document, it's when the dashboard came out, when the documents, when the ways that we've done things have come out, the mobile device didn't exist. The touch panel was the only game in town. The LED, the keypad with the inset LED was the only game in town. That was your only entrance point to the boardroom control or the executive, the knock or anything like that. That was it. You pretty much had that. We have to be careful because the manufacturers and everybody who we're working with, they've already come up with their own apps at this point, their own interfaces for mobile, for tablet, for PC, for web interface, and they're all different, and they're all working on their, again, where in the old days, you had your physical remote control was your secret sauce, right? Some of them had 8 buttons, some of them had 255 buttons, and some of them had LCD screens and then 255 buttons, and that was where the vendors kind of shot out and decided to differentiate themselves. We're seeing that all over again, but the difference is it's in a handheld device, whether it's the tablet or it's a phone or anything else. So the user psychology has changed, and that's constantly where I keep coming back to. They're interfacing with devices that are in their hands all the time, 24/7, to try to convince somebody to use something that they're already used to and that's convenient for them. We need to focus more on that, on how can we align ourselves more with IT? How can we align ourselves more with standard app development? How can we align ourselves with all of the different things that are already out there that we have to be honest, that people are being conditioned to, whether we want to or not, or campaign against it. There are much larger companies with much larger marketing budgets and lobbying efforts to be able to move the direction of how people interact with devices. And so, I kind of look at it as, we don't want to be assimilated within IT, but we definitely have to look at what they're doing right and how we can stick with it. And I see the document as a big step in the right direction, which is looking at flow and overview and not getting too caught up in terms of how it looks. I mean, when the dashboard came out, some of our touch panel programs still had only 256 possible colors available. So color theory is kind of easy at that point. You know, yeah, black or white, and don't mix orange and purple. You know, simple rules.
But you'd be surprised about how many people I think really needed something like that.
And I agree. I've seen orange and purple on the touch panel with black lettering before. Trust me, it's you know. I've seen
if there were 255, they used about 250.
All of it, exactly. 255 colors. By crack, you are getting all of them, sir.
Well, I'd like to
in Comic Sans font while we're at it.
Oh, right. Well, you bring up something, Rich, about this idea of IT and how we relate to it. I think it's it's been a hot topic for a long time, and I got so sick of hearing the word convergence. I'm still sick of it, but I realized a long time ago that this idea of assimilation and convergence is really, there's a limit to it for us. There are certain parts of AV design that will never be assimilated into IT. Mainly because the expertise required is so vast and different from what the core expertise is that's required for IT functions. And this document, sort of like you say, does the same thing for the AV part. Hopefully it'll give some of the IT environments a view of where they fit into what we do and where we fit into what they do and how that comes together. But in terms of convergence, there's still limits to what can happen and needs to happen in terms of bringing AV into the IT environment. And the environments that I've seen where they've tried to bring AV in or just truly assimilate it and take it over, it's been a disaster because they don't have the knowledge and the perspective that we have from the AV side to deal with the things that are audio and video and lighting and acoustics, as well as some of the control aspects that are just way beyond what the expertise is that's required for IT that has to do with the network and network security and big data and all those kinds of things that they're really good at.
I would counter, though, with the fact that right now, again, we had a 10-year jump from, devices existed. Mobile didn't exist 10 years ago when the dashboard came about. I would counter with the fact that right now we're still sort of kind of hedging and betting that we're using copper to transmit our signals, or we're using fiber to transmit our signals. The fact is that within less than 10 years, and we have to accept the reality, more and more our data is going to be packet-based. It is just going to be information. Right. It is an information transfer. It is not a video signal. It's not worrying about the frequency and whether it's going to be at 60 frames FPS as opposed to a 30-frame FPS. We're not going to be worrying about whether it's a 2-channel PCM signal or a multi-channel a DTS signal coming down the line. It is going to be a packet. And the fact is that we have to continually look at differentiating ourselves. And I agree with you. There's expertise in what we do, and that always tends to be, I've said it, we always have this crisis of confidence. It's like IT is so huge and we're becoming smaller and smaller, and we don't want to upset them, so we stay over on this other side because we don't want, the IT department to say, screw it, we'll just take over AV, and then all of a sudden, all of these companies are out of work. I mean, it's the fear of the sky is falling, because IT will just eat the world. But software is going to eat the world. Software is going to eat the way that we transmit the signal. That's
true, but what that means is, and this is what we've talked about for years, is that, yes, I mean, it's already pretty much there in a lot of cases, is that AV is packetized data. But the data part is going from A to D to D to A in that delivery and transport system, and there's some stuff that happens in the middle that gets it from one place to another. Where we come in as AV people, which differentiates us from the IT people, has to do with what happens at those data jacks at either end of the process or end of the wireless path, whatever it is. When it turns into audio, when it turns into video, when it turns into the room and goes into the room, when it turns into a user interface that somebody has to interact with. Those are all things that will remain AV specific that are not IT oriented. We have to get into that overlap into the network and understand and interact with it a lot more, and the same on the IT side. But there are certain limits, I think, to where that can be established to say, this is us and that's them, and we can work together to make it happen, which is the tricky part.
But aren't most vendors trying to flatten that curve? I mean, again, we're on the consultant side, but from a vendor standpoint, if a vendor can say, look, Yeah, I don't want to take that A to D packet. I want to be able to take a digital input, and at the endpoint where my speaker cluster is, I want that all built in. I just want to plug a Cat5 into the back of the speaker cluster,
Right.
set the delays inside here. So all of a sudden, all of those other layers, the middle layer of where part of our industry comes in, if I were a manufacturer, I would be looking to flatten that curve.
Well,
so again,
I'll give you an example of how that's a problem because what I think will happen is they may try to, but it'll be a disaster. Because what I see in the user organizations that I work with looking at the management side of things is that the classic process is the IT guys, whether they have AV or not, is an operation in the organization. Somebody wants video conferencing, so they go to the IT department. They say, oh, we'll get video conferencing because it's just an appliance on the network. So they put in video conferencing and they have a room that's operational. And then either right away or later, things start to go wrong because they didn't address the audio, they didn't address the video, they didn't address the lighting, they didn't address the acoustics. They got a control system that came along with it, which is really awful. I've seen this. I just went on a project recently where they had created, so the integrator had created a user interface that was appropriate enough for a larger size screen, like a 10-inch size screen. It was okay, but it didn't really work that well. So the users ended up getting the handheld remotes out and using things like that to run it, and it messed up everything else. And they scaled it down for another room to a little 4.7-inch display that was where locked down, where you couldn't read it because of the glare. You know, there's just all these problems. So the IT people called me in on this project to say, we give up, you know, just come help us. So I came in and was able to look through it all and say, okay, this is what happened. It's a classic thing. So I think in examples like that, that's what really highlights that differentiation that I think we will maintain regardless of what the owners and the vendors want to try to do to take over what we have and what we offer to the process and to the solution.
And I would say then at that point that this white paper becomes even far more important because it becomes a matter of our industry saying this is how we're different. Yeah. This is why we do what we do. So and that's kind of my circling around to this, which is if we're just information is only as good as the incentive to use it, right?
Right.
You know, you can come up with the most dazzling piece of documentation, but if there's no incentive to use it, it's just really smart guys who put out a really good piece of art. You know, it's cool. You can appreciate it. But if it's not being leveraged industry-wide, then that's the deeper issue at that point. And that's kind of where I'm coming from this, and what Tim was asking me is, as an outsider, I'm like, yeah, but it needs to have teeth. I think it's a good first step. But right during this conversation, my first thought was, yeah, this should be part of the CTSD. You know, no, you can't necessarily have a CTSP because you're dealing with multiple manufacturers, multiple ways of doing things, so you can't penalize somebody if they don't use one vendor over the other. But from a design standpoint and an overview standpoint and a structure standpoint, yeah, maybe there's a hybrid classification that says just that. And the CTSD mostly fits within that, right? To be able to say that, yeah, I'm responsible for considering everything that comes within that space.
And that's a good point, is that I think that's another path here that we could discuss, is that the thing is that AV as a solution is becoming less diverse between what's the AV system, what's the audio and video part, and what's the control part. A lot because of the data component is that you really have to look at them all together at one time, which we've always had to do, but now it's even more important to look at them both at the same time to get the solution to come out like we want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Brad, from InfoComm standpoint, as we kind of wrap up here, guys, to Tim and Rich's point, is there something that InfoComm can create or start adding some of these components to either the D or I wouldn't necessarily say the I, but you know, some elementary points to the regular CTS, and then some more advanced functions or advanced knowledge base to the CTSD?
Well, like I said, that is the goal of this. You know, it wasn't the only purpose of creating a white paper like this, but it is one of the residuals. This goes right into the knowledge bank, and the people who design those courses and those certifications look at this, can pull it out. I mean, they don't have to pull out the whole white paper either. They can pull out modules of it and say, you know, this information about, you know, integrating with building management systems, we really don't touch on that in CTSD right now. And I'm not saying we do or don't, but they could have that conversation and they could start to pluck that kind of information out. And the fact that we keep all this electronic and in a knowledge base is important because we can't wait 10 more years to address trends and control systems designs again. I mean, we've got mobile now, and the paper alludes to it. There's going to be a lot of control system integration that has nothing to do with anything people touch. I mean, sensor technology is going to be integrated into more and more control systems, so things just automatically happen. I mean, I should be able to go into a conference room and it knows that Brad's there and it starts to adjust for what it knows is about to happen, what kind of meeting, what kind of presentation, all those kinds of things. So that kind of knowledge just needs to keep coming up. So we may hit you up again real soon to figure out what are the next challenges that face control systems, and this will all go into the same knowledge bank and it'll inform all of our training.
All right. Well, I will look for that, and maybe this time we'll rope Mr. Fregosa in. So.
AV paper 2. This time it's personal.
Steve, as we're wrapping here, is there something that maybe you wish we would have done or covered, or to Brad's point, the second round in maybe a year?
I just think that there's so much that we could offer and I think that this became a lot bigger than probably was first anticipated. But like Tim said earlier, each of the sections we could go do a deeper dive into, and I think that we could expand into a lot of them. And I think it was a very interesting conversation, which we had to curtail at times about what does the future look like, and we were getting into things that we're not necessarily doing yet, but we anticipate doing. So I think that those are things that we have to be setting ourselves up for and start to document them as we start to touch them. But we've certainly explored the fact that we are living outside of the AV world and outside of the room. And I think that was a big part of this, and talking about being on the network and talking to different types of systems and mobile. I think those were probably the main influencers. But as Brad just said too, the touchless control, some of us are doing it, but I don't think it's as mainstream as one would think, and it probably is going to be growing in popularity, and there's going to be a lot more to that to be able to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, that's going to do it. If you're interested in getting this very paper, Brad, they can just go to the website. Is that right?
If you go to InfoComm.org, there's a resources tab in the top right, and if you go under that, there's another link to like articles and white papers, and it's down there in a list.
All right, it's called the InfoComm Modern Approaches to Control System Design. Guys, thanks so much. Mr. Brad Grimes from InfoComm, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And how can people find more about you or about InfoComm?
Well, everything's at InfoComm.org, and I'm on Twitter at bgrimesdc. Yeah, that's where I live now. So, yeah, D.C., District of Columbia.
All right. Mr. Tim Cape, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Tim. Glad to be here. Glad we had a chance to talk about all this.
Absolutely. Tim is from Tech. Oh, good Lord.
It's a tongue twister, I know.
I got it right the first time. Technitech. And how can people find out more about you?
Through the website, technitect.com, just like the name that's on the banner below me.
All right, very good. My brother Richard Fregosa from Fregosa Design, thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me on. It's always fun. You can find me at UncleRichieLosesHisMarbles.com.
Did you buy that? Did you seriously buy it? You should buy it.
I should.
Yeah, you should.
Probably the best ways are the Twitters at our Fregosa. There it is. And then otherwise on the Facebooks, Google+, FregosaDesign.com, and other various places. But typically type in my name and somewhere I'll show up.
Yeah, so he
like a rat.
Well, yeah. And he writes for CE Pro and a bunch of other folks. So, Steve Greenblatt, thank you, sir.
Thank you. You could find my company at controlconcepts.net, and I'm on a bunch of social media at Steve Greenblatt, and do a little bit of writing here and there for blogs, Commercial Integrator, AVNation, and so forth. So.
And you have a podcast other than this one.
Yes. Thank you. Tech
Did
Talk.
You forget about it, or just
no. It's It's just a long list. Tech Talk, it's home for technology managers. Check it out at techtalkav.com. And Mark Levecchia and I have a podcast that we have some fun with.
Yeah. Close to my heart because I that's where I came from was I'm an old tech manager. So if you want to follow me, it's TD Albright. But more importantly for me and everybody here at AVNation, AVNation is not just this chucklehead from St. Louis. There's an awful lot of people who do an awful lot of really good work. Go by the website avnation.tv, avnation.tv. This program and a host of others. We just had a new episode of our debate show called AV Crosstalk. It was Brock McGinnis and Mr. Leonard Susskind debating design build versus design bid. It was moderated by our good friend Tom LeBlanc from Commercial Integrator, so check that out. A bunch of other stuff. We got some really cool stuff coming up in InfoComm. There's a number of us doing different things at different places. I get to talk with the AVI Systems folks 2 more times, once in Denver and once in Minneapolis. So if you're in either of those 2 places, check that out. Josh Schrago from Sound Reason is heading to NAB next week for the press conference with Chairman Wheeler about net neutrality. And then he's also going to the TSNA conference. So yeah, all kinds of really cool stuff. Check it out if you would please, avnation.tv, avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. This has been A State of Control.